Okay, so here we have question 10 from SAT Prep Test number 5, which again, of course, is provided free of charge by the lovely folks at the College Board. You can get this from their website or from the, I want to say 2018 edition of the, whatever it's called, the Blue Book, which weirdly enough was published before 2018, but what are you going to do? Anyway, so yeah, here is question 10. And question 10 is one of these join two sentences questions. And we know we have one of these for two reasons. First of all, the prompt says which choice most effectively combines the underlined sentences, which is what it pretty much always says in this situation. And then we see over here that the underlined sentences are two full sentences, right? Here's the period right between them. Every part of both sentences is underlined. And then, of course, every answer choice is only one sentence. It's worth pointing this out because these kind of join two sentences questions should really, in most cases, be thought of as technically being separate from other questions that might sort of coincidentally involve joining two sentences. Like you will sometimes see questions where an underlined portion of whatever you're being asked to consider might go across a period or something, but it doesn't contain all of two sentences and it doesn't have all the other features that we just mentioned. So anyhow, I wanted to draw your attention to two interesting aspects of this question, which are the kinds of things that trained test takers would know to look for and exploit, but a lot of people on test day would just totally not notice. And they might still answer the question correctly, those people who didn't notice, but they would have a harder time. They'd probably have to think about it more. There would be less certainty for most of them, and so on. So the first thing I will do is kind of go through the question, as it might be sort of approached by anyone. And then I will show you two things that a trained test taker should notice that would make it easier for trained test takers like me, like you. So here we go. We know that the correct answer must retain the same meaning as the original two sentences, and that it must also follow the College Board's unwritten rules for things like grammar and style and so on, which actually a lot of untrained test takers don't know now that I find myself saying that. But let's assume that they sort of, have a general sense of what sentences sound good or they think that they do. So they might come through and look at choice A, which says the fossil could not be removed from the rock on account of it being too delicate. Semicolon, moreover, comma, the team dug up a block of stone around it and brought it to their lab. And they go, okay, well, whatever, it doesn't sound too awful. They may notice that moreover is sort of a weird way to join those two sentences. And also the phrase on account of it being is kind of weird. I know that whoever's listening to this is probably way younger than me, at least for your sake. I would probably hope so. And you maybe don't remember this, but when I was a kid, I used to watch reruns of Warner Brothers cartoons, and they would always have, or they would often have, this one character who like didn't speak so well. That was kind of his thing. If I remember right, he was like a bulldog or something. I could be totally making up this memory, but I think I remember him saying, "We got to do X like on account of Y," or I gave him the thing on account of he asked me for it, something like that. So anyway, the point is, this phrase "on account of it being" is a little bit weird, even if you are not a cartoon dog, but especially if you are. So that might be something that leaps out at somebody when they first take a look at A, and then they would probably, as untrained people, go, okay, well, it doesn't seem too bad. It's the first one. Let's see if something seems quote unquote better. Again, because untrained test takers generally buy into the idea that there is sort of a like subjective, maybe it's a little bit better, maybe it's a little bit worse kind of way of looking at this, but we know as trained test takers that that is not the case. There are certain things that are correct and certain things that are incorrect. So anyway, again, putting ourselves back in the kind of uninitiated mindset, let's take a look at B as in boy, which says the team thought the fossil was too delicate to remove from the rock, comma, and their next decision was to dig up a block of stone around the fossil and bring it to their lab. It probably sounds a little bit better than A to a lot of people, again, who would be thinking of this in sort of the incorrect kind of subjective, what sounds a little bit better to me, what sounds a little bit worse, like that kind of a way. Then that person might go ahead and take a look at C, which says the fossil was too delicate to be removed from the rock, comma, so the team dug up a block of stone around the fossil and brought it to their lab. And they might think, oh, well, that sounds maybe about as good as B, maybe a little bit better. Let's try D, which says in removing the fossil from the rock, comma, the team thought it was too delicate, semicolon. Then they dug up a block of stone around the fossil and brought it to their lab. Now, I think most untrained test takers, in my experience, would look at this and probably be able to tell that they don't like A very much, just because now that they've read the other three, like, probably sound a little bit better. Interestingly, a lot of untrained test takers would probably be drawn towards D. Even if they didn't pick D, they might linger for a second and say, well, I kind of like, and part of the reason for maybe kind of liking D is this sort of phrasing here where it says, in removing the fossil from the rock, comma, and then sets up, what the team did or whatever, what the team experienced while they were doing that. A lot of untrained test takers will think that the phrase in removing kind of sounds more elevated, sophisticated, complicated. And they might think that the College Board wants to reward that sort of writing because many English teachers would reward it, frankly. It sounds uh, sophisticated. It sounds like you care a little bit about the structure of your sentence and how to make it sound better. As trained test takers, we know that D is actually wrong, of course, but I'm trying to show that a lot of untrained test takers will at least be drawn to it and possibly might even consider it. So we know, of course, as trained test takers that D is wrong, but let's now get into why we know it's wrong and what we know is the correct answer. So we've already now kind of gone through and read each answer choice as an untrained test taker might, which raises the question, what would a trained test taker do and what would they notice? What would they think about? Because that's, of course, why we're here, right? To learn how to think about the test in that way. So a trained test taker probably would look at these answer choices and say, okay, well, I could read them all, as we just did, but it's kind of hard to keep 3 to 4 lines of text per answer choice, like all in your head at the same time, well enough to be able to compare them, meaningfully without making any small mistakes. We know, of course, as trained test takers, that avoiding small mistakes is sort of like the most important part of this whole thing. So how can we then begin to assess what's going on in the different answer choices so that we can figure out which one choice does exactly what the College Board always rewards and which 3 choices do things that the College Board will not reward? Again, notice it's not about the idea that certain answer choices are sort of a little bit better or a little bit worse than others for us. It's just that there is exactly 1 correct answer and exactly 3 wrong answers. And we can identify those things with total confidence because we know how the test actually works. So as trained test takers, one thing that we can definitely use on the writing and language section, but really also throughout the whole test, is something that I call the vertical scan. The vertical scan is this idea of kind of comparing elements of the answer choices in sort of rough columns, that you kind of note on your own based on what you think is interesting about each choice, so that you can compare individual elements of multiple answer choices across across the set of choices without having to keep every single detail of every choice in your head. We might notice, for example, that A and C both begin with the phrase the fossil. B also begins with the, but then it's the team. D begins with something totally different. It has the team later on and so on. That in itself maybe isn't that interesting, but that's sort of the kind of thing that the vertical scan can help to bring up. And actually it does sort of indicate here that this phrase to their lab seems to be, or brought it to their lab, right, is the same in every answer choice. So we can kind of stop worrying about whether the last part of the sentence should be and brought it to their lab, because that's how every one of them ends. Or actually this one is and bring it to their lab, whatever, but you get the idea. So now we know that A, C, and D all have brought it to their lab, B has bring it to their lab, and so on. But none of those differences among the answer choices probably feel like they're, indicative of anything that we care about, and it's true that they aren't. But something that you could notice as part of this vertical scan, and it would probably pick up on very quickly once you started doing it, is this word that we, in the training, we call a transition word. You could call them conjunctions, you can call them a lot of different things, but the word that is inserted after the punctuation that's in the middle of each answer choice. Right. In other words, the way that these answer choices are all presenting the possibility of joining the sentences involves, in this case, some kind of punctuation followed by a conjunction or transition word like moreover or then or whatever. So you might notice that there are 4 different options for those things in the answer choices. Again, we have moreover, and, so, or, then, which might lead you to say to yourself, well, which of these options reflects the meaning of the original sentences? Because we know as trained test takers that the correct answer has to do that. So let's go back to the original sentences, or sentences plural, right? So we have the fossil blah, 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 period. because of the fossil's delicate nature, comma, the team did whatever. So in the original two sentences, there's this idea that what happened in the first sentence is the cause of what is being stated in the second sentence. Only one answer choice directly reflects this idea of causation, right? And it's choice C, as in cat, because we see here that this word so means basically within this context. It doesn't mean the same thing as because, I shouldn't say that, but they both directly reflect the idea that one thing happened and as a direct result, another thing then was forced to happen. The other choices don't precisely reflect that thing, right? So for A, we have the word moreover, which would be used more if, we've been saying something and then we're kind of reinforcing that idea, like in making an argument or providing evidence for something. But moreover is not a word that indicates causation between two things, so we wouldn't like that. For B as in boy, we have and their next decision was blah, blah, blah. And the word and, like, it's not grammatically wrong here. In fact, really arguably, certainly B, C, and D are not grammatically wrong. A is maybe debatable, like in real life. So choice B is not grammatically wrong when it uses the word and. Right? The choice in B is a grammatically acceptable sentence. The problem is that the word and from an SAT standpoint doesn't directly reflect this notion of causation, right? So the and thing doesn't work in this context. And the same problem with D with this word then. Then can be used in like an if-then statement, if it's raining, then do this, that kind of statement. And you could argue that with an if-then structure, you do have causation, but in this case, the word then is being used just to indicate that one thing happened after another, not that one was the cause of the other, right? There's no conditional kind of description going on in D. So just from deciding to do a vertical scan and then noticing at some point that the transition words here are all very different from one another in each of the choices, and remembering that that transition word must accurately reflect the relationship in the original sentences, just from noticing that and these four little words here, we could tell as trained test takers that C is correct, assuming that we haven't misread what's going on, which of course we always have to be on the lookout for. So that's one way to know that C is correct and to get there relatively quickly without bothering to memorize every single one of these words and every answer choice and hold it all in your head at one time. But there is also another way to approach this question, probably even faster. And again, it relies on understanding the unwritten rules of the writing and language section that the College Board has decided to stick to for whatever reason. So again, we said before that the correct answer to one of these questions needs to reflect the original meaning of the two sentences in the passage. And it also needs to follow all the other unwritten style and grammar guidelines that the College Board uses. Well, one of those guidelines is when the shortest answer choice, which happens to be C, when the shortest answer choice is grammatically acceptable, and again, in this case, also reflects the meaning of the original sentences, then it must be right. In other words, all things being equal, the shortest answer choice is correct. So if we find, again, that the shortest answer choice matches the meaning of these two sentences over here, which we know that it does, then it doesn't even really matter what the other answer choices say. We should still read them to make sure we haven't, overlooked something, or maybe it turns out that when we thought that C was the shortest answer choice, if we looked at A more closely, we would have realized that A is only 2.5 lines long and not 3.5, whatever it is. So we should always read every answer choice, but once we are satisfied that C is the shortest answer choice, and we are positive that C accurately reflects what's going on in the original sentences and doesn't have any other grammatical issues of its own, we know C is correct for that reason too, which again allows us to kind of visually assess all the answer choices, zero in on C, make sure that it checks all the boxes it's supposed to check, and then sort of go back and look at the other three choices more from the standpoint of just making sure that we haven't made a mistake, right? As opposed to trying to figure out exactly what every choice says and feeling like we're starting from scratch with each one and keeping them all in our heads at once and so on. So again, a variety of ways here to attack question number 10. And notice once again that the only real way to do this with total confidence and speed and efficiency is to understand that the College Board is not merely testing us on sort of a subjective idea of what good writing sounds like, right? That idea would lead a lot of people to pick D, or at least to argue among C and D, or possibly B, C, and D. But instead, once we know that the College Board isn't being subjective at all and is following an objective set of knowable constant, rules that are always applicable to every single question, once we know that, then answering 10 becomes every bit as certain as answering a math question on the SAT or something like that. So that's the key thing to keep in mind. whenever you run into a scenario where you feel like more than one choice is arguable or something like that, it means that you have misread something or you're forgetting about a rule or some kind of thing like that. Because again, when we focus on the way the test is actually designed, we can always find the single correct answer to any real SAT question. So that is enough of me talking about number 10, repeating myself yet again, because the test repeats itself, and that's what I'm talking about. So let's go ahead now and take a look at question number 11.